Well, hello, and welcome. Welcome to another episode of the Imperfect Men's Club podcast. My name is Mark Aylward, and I'm here as always with my good friend, colleague, and co-host Jim Gurley. And yeah, I'm going to beat the dead horse on how cool the pregame was again, Jim. I just kind of can't avoid that topic. It was good. What we came around to was kind of a combination of something Jim came across in terms of content, but also the recent visit he took to see his new granddaughter with his mom, and the four generations that kind of coexisted over the weekend, and some of the thoughts that came from that trip. And it's pretty easy to button it up to go back to some of the significant innovations in our country over the last couple of centuries and how they're cyclical in 80-year progressions and 25-year progressions. And the conclusion drawn that we agree with is that why 2025 is the single most pivotal year in our lifetime. So that sounds like a real interesting topic, Jim. I'll throw the mic back over to you and tell us about your visit, and congratulations, by the way.
Well, thank you, Mark. Yeah, I think this is one of those episodes that we would put into of our five categories of our Imperfect Men's Club framework. The imperfection is the perfection. This definitely would fall under worldview.
Mhm.
So, for those of you that aren't familiar with our framework that we use every week to decide what we're going to talk about our different episodes, it comes from these five areas of our life that are always going on, whether we're aware of it or not, no particular order. And that's our relationship with our profession, whatever that is. It's a big part of being a man and our value. The other one after that would be our relationship with others. That's our mother, wives, women, friends. That's always going on. The relationship with ourselves. That's our physical well-being, our mental health. That's always something that we're striving to be better. A relationship with money, which is a huge relationship, and then the relationship with the world. So, just perspective, again, having a granddaughter. So, in 2025, I came across this 15-minute talk about how 2025 is the single most pivotal year in our lifetime. And so, yeah, well, there was some perspective because I was traveling with my mother, which is 85 years old, and she hadn't been on an airplane in about a decade, 10 years. Um, Not that she didn't have the ability to, she just didn't have the desire or reason to. But somehow she became very excited about this great granddaughter and wanted to experience this. So it worked out real nice. So, but a couple of things was just how excited she was. You know, she was just so excited to to go see this granddaughter, but then also this experience of this world that she really hadn't seen. Just even going to the airport and how instead of calling a taxi, you get in an Uber. All these little things that we just take for granted. And and then I came across this talk about how this is not the only time in well our lifetime and going back hundreds of years that a technology changed everything, but also the importance of capitalism and America, or
Mhm.
Western, not just America, and that without the United States of America, these innovations don't come around. That we play a really important role in these new dimensions. And I've because I'm very involved in an AI project at the moment. I've done some talks about AI. Instead of referring to as artificial intelligence, I consider it as amplified intelligence. And
Mhm.
I'm openly say I'm an AI optimist, meaning that this technology is going to change things in ways we don't know, but I think for the good. So, but Mark, what I always like when we have these conversations is your perspective. And in the pregame, we had you shared the age of your father, about a decade different than my mother. So I thought what we do today is just go down this timeline from 2025 and back, because it does reframe things, puts things in a different perspective in regards to there's always been problems in the world, there's always been wars, there's always been events that change things. What I didn't
Yep.
realize is that it turns out these events come around about every 25 years. So this is a repeating pattern, and it just happens to be 25 years. And of course, it just happens to be 2025. So, what a great way to kind of reflect on the end of now we're coming up to the end of 2025. And I think it's going to be a fun conversation. So let's get started
Yeah.
with item
Well,
number five,
yeah.
or I
Well,
should
you
say
got
one.
yeah, you got some self-reflection going on here.
Yeah,
Yeah,
no
I
doubt
think
about
the
it.
to before we skip behind 2025, I think to punctuate it is the supposition here is that AI, clean energy, and bioengineering, those three
Hmm.
technologies, are starting to scale and demand a full societal transformation. And I think that's a very interesting way to put it,
Hmm.
a full societal transformation. And as you were talking about your mom, I thought, if you walked out of your front door for the first time, proverbially, in 10 years and just looked around, what you would see that would be different. And you hit on the Uber just as an example, but you could take that, you could iterate that 10 or 15 times over and say, look, what is that, son? Mom, you don't know what that is? That's a self-driving vehicle. What do you mean? You
Hmm.
know, it just goes on and on and on. But
Yeah.
yeah, I'll come back to my
Yeah,
dad in
yeah.
a
Well, her
sec.
reflection on that particular technology was, yeah, was about 20, 25 years ago. When did the iPhone or the mobile device come out? Probably about
Yeah,
25 years ago now, right?
yeah, I think it
So,
was early
but the difference
2000s.
from for her observation was that everything was done on this phone. In fact, we couldn't even print out a boarding pass because SFO doesn't allow you to print out boarding passes. All it would do is send you an email of a QR code that would get you through security. So
Hmm.
again, these things we just think about every day. But from her perspective, if she didn't have her cell phone with her, or she even if she has it, it's she doesn't know how to operate it and download all the apps and all these different things. So the cell phone was the technology that really it's changed her life compared to when she was born to
Hmm.
now. How everything is done on the cell phone, and if you're not on, and you don't have a cell phone, or you ran out of a battery, your life just basically stops. Right? Everything about everything we do is so connected to our phones. I'm
Yeah.
talking about a travel experience, but
Oh yeah, yeah. No, I mean the start of this guy that does this video starts the current age of technology in around 2003, which I
hmm
think is right around the time the cell phones became kind of mainstream.
hmm
And then the other thing he cites there is amplified physical power and where that's going with bioengineering. But
hmm
they also go back to the 1700s. This historical pattern of 80-year cycles. This guy starts
hmm
that in 1787. And
yeah.
as America undergoes this vast traumatic contortion, and all then many of these cycles are triggered by significant global warfare.
hmm
The Civil War not being global, but still that kind of sparked the 25-year burst after the Civil War. And
hmm
you were talking about innovation. This is the thing about history, dude. I don't consider myself a history buff. I'm not well skilled. I have basic fundamental knowledge, but I think that a lot of the challenges that we have today are people just messing around with what's actually true historically and what actually never took place. Slightly different topic, but I think that in one of the messages I get from this exercise that we went through with this video that you found is that the best way, I think, to really understand how the world works, to develop a healthy worldview, is to understand history. Because what we're
hmm
saying here is history
yeah.
repeats itself, and it repeats itself in a rather obvious pattern of 25 and 80-year periods. And I'm sure you could dig deeper in there and you might change 25 to 24, but that's not the point. The point is
Yeah.
history repeats itself. And when you
hmm
when you allow innovation in a country like the United States, and I'll give the other Western countries their due, but the thing about capitalism is more importantly, it's a free market. Money
hmm
moves where people want it to move. Money moves where people want things, need things, like things. You
hmm
can't manufacture that. And God knows many companies have tried.
yeah.
But
Yeah,
yeah.
I would again just to add to what you're saying in terms of there's always been problems in the world, and it puts it in perspective. it's always interesting when you talk to somebody, they're pretty worked up about the world. And you'll find that that's because they're watching TV every day or listening to traditional media. And you can, again, reframe that as the world's coming to an end and everything's messed up. But to your point earlier, Mark, if you go back and you understand history, there's always problems. There's always wars.
Yep.
There's always major changes. And I think as I call it wisdom, especially at this stage, I like to try to at least help people reframe that and saying, hey, you can only control so much, but also put it in perspective that this is not the worst time there's ever been. In fact, you could say it's probably the safest and best time to be. So that's an important. But I thought we'll just go down and we'll just take off the one at a time because they'll go pretty quick. But again, 2025, it says the tipping point for the society reinvention. So that, I think that's what we talked about, AI and some of these other technologies that happened in 2025. And then the second one is the start of a current age of technology. And that's, again, that starts between 2003, 2022. And so it's what we touched on, right? Innovation is the tipping point of the technologies, were the mobile phone, AI was starting to come in about
Hey,
that time.
social media, I mean,
So
social
yeah,
media has been around for a long time now.
yeah.
And it's look at I look at the evolution of social media in the same context that I look at the evolution of AI. I think that
Mhm.
there's a lot, and Jim, I spent decades in the technology space, so
Yeah.
I was at the forefront of technological innovation because the people that I was colleagues with were developing it,
Mhm.
and there's these innovation seems to take this developmental cycle. It's like something catches on, that's a great idea. No one ever
Mhm.
thought of that before. And
Mhm.
then all these experts come out, and no one can be an expert yet because it's brand new,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So
Exactly.
this speculation just abounds, and the politics get involved, and then the money starts flowing. And I mean, if you think back about the first days of Apple or the first days of Microsoft or
Mhm.
Hewlett Packard or IBM, most of those companies didn't even start off to become what they became. I mean,
Mhm.
Amazon, he was selling books, right?
Yeah.
So it's like, that's why when I talk about AI, when I think about AI with people, I'm like, I don't know what's going to happen. And I don't think anybody does,
Mhm.
because all you have to do is shift a political legislation, right? That would shift everything potentially,
Mhm.
massively, one way or the other.
Yeah.
The availability of reliable energy, I don't think we've
Mhm.
proven that yet. I think stuff's breaking and going down. I can't believe our electrical grid hasn't collapsed at some point. But
Mhm.
there's all kinds of mini innovations in there, like nuclear power and green energy and wind power
Sure.
and where do we put these batteries when we throw them away, and on and on and on and on and
Mhm.
on. So anyway, I
Yeah, but
think
based on
that
this timeline, that happened about 25 years ago, where just to add to what you were saying, there's these newer energies, right? Whether it was cleaner energies, nuclear is coming back, so energy has a huge impact on these major changes, and
But
we're going to see that in
maybe it
2000.
takes 25 years to flush out what I just talked about. Like the gurus have to go away. The experts have to become clear. Their authority is built over time, right? We discover new things on top of new things on top of new things. And then we bump up against the geopolitical circumstance. We bump up against all these other legislative things and privacy and security and all that kind of stuff. I don't think anybody
Mhm.
really knows where it's going. I think a few people
Right.
have the better idea than most, but I think you
Yeah.
probably could see the same thing as we go deeper back into history
Yeah.
with
Well,
less
again,
tech.
you talk about innovation. Innovation is one. Where do those innovations come from? And again, in our lifetime, so much of it is based on the post World War II boom, which is 1945 to 1970. That
Yep.
time period, and just like I said, going back to your point about innovation, many of those innovations came from our military or from our research and development, from government funded things. So the internet is a byproduct of World War II, right? Of how we
Hmm.
communicated. So going back to your point about, and it's there's the technology was developed by not one person. That takes a country. So when you have an incentive like winning a war in World War II, um, not only did there's a sense of urgency, but we came together, we collaborated with different industries. I mean, I was in New Orleans has a museum and it talks about how we won World War II, and it was the U.S. Really working together with Ford Motor Company, GE, all those resources came together and started building equipment. Then that's how we
Hmm.
won the war. We won it through logistics and the ability to make things. And you don't realize how important that was. It was working together. It's actually happening right now. Again, I don't want to make this a political conversation, but I don't know if you saw a couple of weeks ago, Trump had all the tech CEOs in the White House, right?
Yeah.
Zuckerberg, all those guys. Well, there's a reason why they're all there, because those are the technology, those are the titans of our time, and if they start to work together, then that's very good for our country. It's very good for the world. But yeah, World War II is still everything that we lived had a direct relationship to World War II. Particularly interested in hearing about your father, his background. So my mother came into the world, I think, in 41. So that's when did the war end? That was around that time, right? So
44. Yeah.
yeah, 44. So yeah,
43,
her
44.
life starts, basically when the war ends or right around that time. So, big was affected, obviously, her parents by the Depression. So that explains the scarcity. That explains, we talk about money in our podcast, our relationship with money, that whole generation, or her to say her parents, our grandparents, experienced not having anything. And then the war
Yeah,
comes.
yeah,
So,
yeah. I
but,
mean,
but
my dad was born in 1928. He was one of 11 children, and I
yeah,
think his dad made, 15 bucks a week. He was a fisherman and he swept the churches on the weekends. So he grew up in, I don't know if I'd call it abject poverty, but he was sleeping in the same bed with two of his brothers for up until he was about 10. They never owned
yeah.
a car,
Yeah, Mark,
you know.
read number the post-war world, and then I want to hear a little bit more about your dad and how do you think that impacted his
Yeah, I
life and then
mean,
even yours. Yeah,
the post-World War II boom at 1945 to 1970, the most recent 80-year cycle began around 1945, coming off of World War II and the Great Depression of the 30s. Period saw a massive 25-year boom, often called the high point of global capitalism, where America resolved intense political tensions and built a great society based on policies like taxing the rich at 90%, massive public infrastructure investment like the interstate highway system, and expanding higher education through the GI Bill. I
yeah,
mean, almost all of that is directly related to the war coming to an end. And
yep.
the other thing is you got all these dudes coming home,
Oh
right?
yeah,
And they're gonna get married, they're gonna have kids, they're gonna build houses. Neighborhoods started popping up everywhere,
yeah.
and
That's a big deal, Mark. What you said. Not only did they were they at that age where they were spenders, they had GI Bills, there was a lot of government investment. They all had something that we don't have right now, and that is a military experience. One, they obviously won a huge war, so they were celebrated, but they also had uniformity. There was and camaraderie, right, where
yep.
they learned some basic skills. And so think of how well that applies to business, because if you hire somebody and they had a military background, they understand there's an order. They understand they can take orders. It's very different than than a 22-year-old now, right? Or
Well,
25-year-old.
you had a commonality which was
Yes,
called
commonality is the word. Yeah, yeah,
is called patriotism, and that
yeah,
drove a
yeah,
tremendous innovation and progress. And then, at
yeah.
the tail end of that 25-year boom, 1970, I was born in 61. You were what, 65?
65. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. And so, then what else started? Well, civil rights and
Oh yeah,
feminism, and then Vietnam,
yep,
and
yeah,
so yeah, I mean, that's why history is so important. It's
yeah,
just like,
yeah,
otherwise you're gonna repeat the same shit over and over again.
yeah.
But
But yeah, that it falls in our worldview category of our framework, right? The worldview is based on um, a lot of subcategories, but one is your childhood, and your childhood is based on the time and place. So yeah, again, growing up, being born in 1965, I mean, just look at just change just as far as laws that were passed, as far as voting rights and um, the equality of women and blacks or others. It was a significant time. Also, the place, right? So I was born in Oakland, so next to Berkeley. You know, a lot went on during that time period as far as protest and change. And
mhm,
then also the innovation. If you look at the technology companies, they were most of them, if not all of them, had headquarters or started off here in the San Francisco Bay Area. So
yeah.
innovation has always been a big part of the environment that I grew up in, but and also political movements, and not always for the good. I think we would both agree they like to celebrate the protest, but I also saw some things that other issues like apartheid. I remember those protests, and you
Hmm.
know,
Hmm.
I think
Well,
this is why.
the political landscape changed as well. I mean, it was.
Yes.
I remember my dad saying the last Democrat he voted for was John F. Kennedy,
Yeah.
and he became a Republican after that. And and you and I have talked politics off the cuff quite a bit, and I don't think these group names are worth anything anymore. I don't think the word conservative means anything or liberal means anything.
Hmm.
I don't think Democrat or Republican means anything. I
Hmm.
think independent is just as often a cop out as it is a good choice. It's just like we've just we've taken all these traditions and we've just melted them down with victimhood and groupthink and critical
Yep.
race theory and all this other bullshit. And it's just like you look
Yep.
at the historical way the world has evolved, at least in America. And the
Hmm.
last one here is this historical pattern starting in 1787.
Yeah, but before we
Established
jump to that, let's move on to the next one. So the next one is the 25-year bust after the Civil War. I'll let you.
burst after the
Excuse, thank,
Civil
thank
War.
you. That's this is
Yeah.
why you're reading it, not me.
Let me
But yeah,
continue that one.
yeah,
So,
please. Yeah,
following periods of extreme political conflict, and this is 1865 to 1890, these
yeah.
junctures led to bursts of unbelievably widespread innovation lasting 25 years. And a key example is the period after the American Civil War, which ended in 1865, leading to the explosion of progress, including the Homestead Act, land grant
Hmm.
universities, and the rapid expansion of 175,000 miles of rail that stitched the continent together. Yeah, that's a big deal. You know.
It's remarkable. And again, this back to childhoods, right? And so it's four generations, you know, with the birth of my granddaughter. But I had happened. I was in Zonico. That's where my grandmother's family is from. So we're Swiss Italian. So I had some perspective of one why they came here, right? During uh, right, right. Well, of course, it was before World War II, but there was a reason that so many immigrants were leaving the U.S. to get, or excuse me, using leaving Europe, and this is Switzerland, Swiss Italy. So there were skills that were needed in the U.S. and jobs, and that's why they migrated to that. Probably no different than your family, being Irish. But also then you start to realize, what the infrastructure that was the investment that was made by the government, railroad for first. There was a huge technology. Without railroad, there was no way, and shipping, to get across the Atlantic, and then also to get to build out the West. And so a lot of that development came from uh, governments and the Homestead Act. Again, now I'm going to my father's side because my brother and I still have the family property. It's like 10 acres. Uh, and that my grandfather was able to get I think it started off with 60 acres or whatever it was through the Homestead Act. And,
Hmm.
and, and then he sold off, luckily there's about 10 acres left that we still own. But that had a huge impact on the people from all over the world coming to the United States during that time. It was a coal mine. The property is actually right next to a coal mine, and it was the railroads that brought people from all over the world. So my grandfather actually spoke five different languages. He spoke Spanish, that was his first language. Of course, English. Um, the other one was Portuguese, Italian, and one other, because that's where everybody was coming from. You had to
Yeah.
speak that language in order to work in the mines. So
Another interesting thought that crosses my mind is, we've talked about the industrial revolutions and the great innovations of our time, and you always have underneath them, at least at the beginning, you're taking advantage of a section of the population because it's less expensive than the rest of the population.
yeah, it's a good
And
point.
and, and when
Exploiting other
you're
humans. We
yeah, when
always
you're you
that's oh yeah,
the
yeah,
first big one that you can cite is, you can cite the African American exploitation called slavery. Then
yep,
there was a similar thing going on with the Irish in the Northeast in Boston, not for as long, but it was like no Irish need apply kind of stuff. Who
yeah.
built the railroads? Chinese slaves,
That's
right?
right.
They
Yeah,
call, what do they call them?
yeah.
Coolies?
We always that's what human beings do. We
And
exploit others.
the Industrial Revolution,
Yep.
that began with child labor, which was soon called
Oh,
against the
interesting.
law. So this is the
Yeah,
way, this is the dark side of innovation, and I'm,
yeah,
I'm sure there's
yeah.
there's a dark side to the AI innovation. I'm sure there is, you know,
Yeah, yeah,
and it's
but to get
probably,
just one key point, what you're saying about labor too. This is where the U.S. really was different in that we started to create labor unions. In fact, my great grand uncle was, a big part of that movement because the
mhm.
miners were being treated like shit. So he started this miners union, and then that is why we're different than other countries, because all of a sudden labor became really important. We organized, and labor unions at one point played a really important role to have this middle class
Yep,
of
yep.
consumers. It was the Henry Ford, right? I wanted to build a car that my own employees can afford to buy, and
Yeah, yeah.
and
He's a
the,
fascinating guy.
yeah, but this whole American experiment was different at that time than other parts of the world. Of course, many have copied us, and many have fallen as well. But yeah,
Well,
let's wrap up with the last one here before we wrap up. The historical patterns of the 80-year cycle starting in 1786. I'll let you
yeah,
take it
the,
from there. Yeah.
the the video establishes that America and the world undergo vast traumatic contortions at junctures that tend to follow an 80-year cycle. The foundational cycle occurred between 1787 and 1810, during which America was created as an extension of the European Enlightenment, fundamentally changing society from a feudal system to the modern world. Yeah, I mean, that's where it all began, right? I mean, again, not being a history guy, just in a really kind of surface level way, we fled feudalism, and feudalism to me is, there's a king and everyone else is under the king, and there's
Mhm.
there's princes and queens and stuff, but it's one guy's running the show, and you got to do what you're told, and that's a
Mhm.
tremendous oversimplification. But then we came over here and we said, well, what if we left what
Mhm.
the rules are up to the collective people?
Mhm.
And we put people in office by choice, by voting, and those people were entrusted to represent us, but they never were to represent themselves. They were always to
Mhm.
represent the greater good of the people. And again,
Mhm.
a tremendous oversimplification, but that's a world-changing evolution, you know.
Yeah.
And a lot
It
of
also
people
makes you
died.
appreciate the Constitution and a couple of simple things, like you said, the First Amendment, the Second Amendment, and how that played out to create this 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 world that we have now.
Do you know what
It's
you know what
remarkable
amazes?
their wisdom of what those guys were able to think of. But to your earlier point, compared to England or the other places they were coming from at the time, this was very different, right? And it had checks
Yeah,
and balances to make sure that no one person could could rig the system in their favor. We're still
yeah.
trying. Everybody's still trying to rig the system in their favor,
Well,
but
there was no room for victimhood in that world either.
no,
You
not at all.
you either you survived or you died. But
Yeah,
the thing that amazes me most about that, and I can wrap it up. I want to make sure that I ask people to go review and rate us. But I
yeah.
think the thing that, because my girlfriend Shayla was just finished a book on Thomas Jefferson, a biography,
Oh,
and
interesting.
or
Yeah.
and it's like, these guys that were making all these rules and decisions and signing all these life critical documents, they were in their late 20s and early 30s.
I didn't know that.
Yeah,
You think they'd be a bunch like 70, 80-year-old guys,
they
wisdom guys.
weren't.
No,
There was
that's
one or two of
crazy.
old guys, but like Jefferson was like 28, 30 years old. I mean,
I had
Hamilton,
no
all,
idea.
all these guys were, it was incredible. Now, of course, everybody died younger then, and people got married when they were 10, 11, and 12 years old. So the world
Yeah.
was different, but still, with the largesse of that effort and the wisdom of those young men is astonishing to me.
Yeah, it really is. Yeah.
Astonishing. So listen,
Yeah.
I think 2025 is going to be, it has been a fascinating year. I think
Yeah.
2026 will be as well. I don't really have any of those answers, but if you guys, anybody listening, enjoyed this and found it interesting or wants to share it, it really is helpful if you go to the Apple platform particularly and give us some stars and some reviews just real quick. It really expands our reach. And so if you can think of anybody that might be entertained or benefit from this, please do that and spread the word.
Great. Thanks, Mark. Till next
Thanks,
week.
Jim. Okay, see you.